Hey guys, welcome back to Sully's Tech Hub. I am doing my full review after about a month and a half of owning the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. I have learned a lot about it. I've used it a lot. I've taken probably close to 2,000 images on the phone, if not more by now. I haven't counted, but I've taken quite a few. And I've used it in a lot of other applications like gaming and so on and so forth. I will say there is quite a big problem with the phone, and I'm not just saying that for clickbait, and I'm not just saying that as like some sort of cliffhanger, but there is actually a problem I've found with the phone that I think if you're gonna keep the phone for long term, it might actually pose a problem for some people, so stay tuned for that. I will save it towards the end. But anyways, this is going to be the full review of the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. I'm currently filming this on the primary rear sensor, so the 1x lens. So how does it look? How does it sound? Are you able to hear some of the birds that are chirping in the background? You should be able to hear some birds chirping. So we'll see how easily it picks up those sounds, and maybe it does and maybe it doesn't, who knows, but we'll see. So I just wrapped up probably the lengthiest Xiaomi 15 Ultra review. That's not on purpose, I just ramble a lot. For your guys' convenience, I'm gonna put timestamps on everything, and I highly recommend that you use them. Only because this review is gonna be close to an hour long, probably, just based on everything that I've filmed. And I know that many of you are not going to be interested in every topic discussed, but if you want to watch it the whole way through, that's fine. But I really recommend that you use the timestamps and just listen to the parts that you're interested in. This is going to be my feature-length Xiaomi 15 Ultra review, and then I'm also going to do separate videos in the future, really deep diving on the video capabilities and deep diving on the advanced photo features. I'm going to talk extensively about the camera in this video, but I'm not going to deep dive into the like advanced camera features, the raw functions. I'll very superficially touch on those, but I'm not going to deep dive on them in this video. So this is just going to be basic camera functions, basic video functions, battery usage, all that kind of stuff. But for the more advanced stuff, those will be coming in a later video. I keep remembering other features that need to be included. One of the other things that you can do on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra that's quite unique is you can basically do AirDrop to other Apple products. You do have to download an app. It's not really complicated. I thought at first it might be complicated, but it's really not. There's like a Xiaomi Share app. You download it and then you pair it. I don't know. I don't even remember what the process was because this was like a month ago. But what I do remember is that it was not a complicated process and it works. You can use basically AirDrop and it just beams over. It's very fast. It doesn't take the files very long at all. But yeah, basically AirDrop works on Xiaomi 15 Ultra as long as you have the app. I'm gonna do a small test to see how it favors with wind noise. Should be testing the dynamic range right now against the sun, but we will see. But what I'm gonna do is I'm going to narrate through the next part of this review, but I'm gonna do it with the window down, so there should be plenty of wind coming into the car, and you can kind of hear what it sounds like again. It's basically another audio test. I am still using the rear-facing camera. In other words, the primary sensor, the big 1-inch sensor. So you should see some background blur, maybe. I don't know, hopefully. But we're going to be listening for some wind noise and see how it sounds. Hopefully you're picking up good audio. Hopefully you can hear some of the bustling of outside of the car. Who knows, maybe some of the gravel. Hopefully it's picking up all that. Now I don't shoot a whole lot of video, so this is, for me, a bit less usual. I tend to shoot a lot more photos than I do videos. So I actually am not going to speak too much to the video capabilities of this phone in this video. I think what I have planned is I'm going to do a dedicated video specifically on video recording capabilities of the phone separately, where I dive into those a little bit more than what I have up until this point, including testing out things like the log footage. Of course, as you probably already know, this phone can record log. In addition to that, this phone can also record 4K 120 slow-mo, so I'm going to look into that in that video. I will be sharing a photography component on this phone later in this video. However, I am not going to deep dive into all the pro modes and the raw. I will superficially touch on those topics, but I'm going to kind of have more of a dedicated photography video, which I know is what most of you are waiting for. Let me talk about the battery life for just a moment on this phone. If I didn't already mention, I'm actually using the Chinese version of this phone. I'm not for sure if the green color is a Chinese exclusive. I'm starting to believe that this might be the case. What's making me suspect that is all of the reviewers that I've seen that have had this phone, if they have that dual tone color, which is the black with the silver bar across the side, or I guess across the top, depending on how you're holding it, it's always the black model. Now, I have the green leatherette model, and that makes me think that it's a Chinese exclusive, and maybe that's why they don't have the black, or excuse me, that's why they don't have the green color, is because theirs is the global version of the phone, and mine is the Chinese version of the phone. There are some advantages to the Chinese version, and I'm sure there are some drawbacks as well. The wind is getting quite strong right now, so we will see if this thing is surviving the strong wind, because there's a lot of wind coming into this car. But one of the big differences, the global version of this phone has a 5,400 milliamp hour battery, if I'm not mistaken, whereas the Chinese version of this phone has a 6,000 milliamp hour battery. So it is quite a bit more substantial. I mean, it's not huge. It's just knocking on roughly 10% larger, but you're talking about 10% larger on a battery that's already quite large. And so in total, in terms of experienced battery life, I mean, that could equal up to an hour to an hour and a half longer screen on time. So anyways, if parked, how was that? Did you get a lot of wind noise, or was my voice clear throughout? If my voice is unclear through that thing, I will put subtitles so that it's a little bit easier to understand. But if I think that it's clear, I'm not going to do any subtitles. Okay, I'm going to try the ultra-wide camera now. I do have the windows rolled up because I'm done testing any kind of audio with regards to wind noise and all that stuff, so there's no reason to test that any further. But we will get some ultra-wide footage, and maybe this is a more preferable focal length for some people. It's certainly more comfortable because you're not strained to kind of hold your arm out quite as far. Anyways, let me tell you guys a little bit about the screen. So the screen on this phone, I should be rolling B-roll on the screen right now. It's a little bit different from the Pixel 8 Pro. Now, I've looked at the phone a lot side by side, and I actually can't say definitively that it's brighter than the Pixel 8 Pro. And I'm just basing that off of my experience. I've had the same content on the screen at the same time, both of the devices maxed out, and if anything, the Pixel 8 Pro appears to be slightly brighter. So if that speaks to anything to how bright the Pixel 8 Pro was when it came out, there you go. They are calibrated quite a bit differently. I would say that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is calibrated to be a lot punchier. Like, the dark stuff on the screen is a lot darker, and the bright stuff on the screen is a lot brighter. And I believe I was able to tune it, but I do recall out of the box, it felt to me like the color tuning on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra was a little bit on the cool side. And I only mention that for people who are gonna buy this phone and do a lot of photography on it. is that you need to pay attention to the way that the screen is calibrated, because if the screen is calibrated cold, you might think that a lot of the images that you're shooting are cool, like the color tone is too cool on white balance, and it may not actually be cool. It may just be that your screen is slightly calibrated cool. And then once you share your photos, let's say if you share them to social media, and then you go and view them on another device, you may find when you're editing your photos that you're actually skewing them too far warm, because you're compensating for the cool tone of the screen. So that's just something I would pay attention to. I'd check it out of the box, maybe compare it to another display that you know to be color accurate. If you have like a photo editing monitor or something like that, you know, maybe check it against that and see what it looks like, or just trust your eyes. But to me, it's a little cool straight out of the box. Now we are on the front-facing camera. This is the selfie camera, if you want to call it that. One of the things I want to mention, it's not a big deal, I just thought I would kind of point it out, is when I flipped the video around to the selfie, it actually changes the settings, and I don't like that a whole lot, that it's doing that. You know, I have the rear cameras set for 4K 60 frames per second shooting, and then when I switched to selfie camera shooting, it defaulted to 1080-30. So it both changed the resolution and it changed the frame rate, even though the phone is capable of 4K 60 on the front-facing camera. So I did change, just so that you know, I did change it back to 4K 60. So this should be the same format of video as the previous one. Just going to point out that it changed. So this is how the selfie camera looks. It should sound the same because it's the same microphones, but maybe there's a little bit different, you know, white balance. I will say this, and I'll be rolling photos of this, but I have taken selfies with the front-facing camera, and then I flipped the phone around and shot photos with the rear-facing camera. And I'll tell you, one thing that I noticed that's a little bit different, it's obviously you're gonna get a different look just based on the fact that it's a selfie camera. It's a much smaller size. It's, you know, doesn't have the lenses that the rear-facing cameras have. But in addition to the fact that it's very different optically and by sensor size, it also shoots colors quite a bit differently. So depending on the color profile that you want, you may still want to actually shoot your selfies with the primary camera. I don't know if I'm the only person that does that, but I regularly flip my camera around and shoot my selfies with primary sensors, because they're just better. They're better sensors. They're bigger, they have better optics, and in the case of the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, the colors are calibrated quite a bit differently on the selfie camera compared to the rear-facing camera. Primarily, you should be able to see it in the photos that I'm rolling on the screen, but the primary difference to note is the shadows are much punchier on the main sensor. The selfie camera assumes colors that are a lot more like, I'm gonna call them smartphone colors, which is, I say that because that's just kind of the trend of what, you know, iPhone and Samsung Galaxy and Google Pixel, it's what they tend to do, where you have brightened shadows, you have reduced highlights, and you have maybe a little bit more, let's just call it fun colors. Whereas, especially with the Xiaomi tuned to Leica Authentic, with the Xiaomi on Leica Authentic, you're getting a much, you know, I'm not going to say significantly reduced, but a little bit reduced saturation compared to those smartphone color profiles. And you're also getting a little bit more depth of shadow. It's a little bit more contrasty than the front-facing camera. So just something to point out. But yes, this is the front-facing camera. Another one of the advantages of getting the Chinese version of this phone, I've heard that the Western version does not come with the charger in the box, what the Chinese edition does. So the Chinese version had the, I want to say it's a 100 watt, it might be a 90 watt wired charging in the box. I'm not going to tell you, what percentage and what kind of minutes battery you get. It's obviously really fast, like that. If you throw it on the charger for 30 minutes, it will last a full day. Like I was mentioning earlier, the Chinese version of this phone has a 6,000 milliamp hour battery, and I have not been able to kill it in a single day. I have not. And that includes a day where I left very early in the morning. I shot over 700 images on the phone. So basically the screen's on the whole time. I'm taking photos, switching focal lengths, all that stuff all day long. I think I left the house around 10 a.m. and I got home at like 9 p.m., 10 p.m. that day, shooting photos all day long. And I want to say that was the closest I've ever gotten to killing the battery in a single day. And I believe I still had around 20 to 25% battery when I got home. I don't remember exactly, but I wasn't like in the red. And on this phone, 20 to 25% battery is still like 2 to 2.5, maybe even 3 hours of screen on time remaining. So it's quite significant, the battery life on this phone, and I've not been able to kill it so far. In addition to the battery and the charger, you do get a case. I can't remember if the Western version comes with a case. It's just a clear. It's not really flexible, and I don't know what it's closer to being to like a plastic than it is a silicone. It's more rigid than you typically get with like your soft molded cases. It's not incredibly grippy. I have another case on my Pixel 8 Pro that's got a lot more of a rubbery type texture to it, and it's a lot easier to grip that phone. And that's another one of the small complaints that I have about the Xiaomi that I'll talk about in a second, is gripping it. But yeah, so you get the charger in the box, you do get the case, and then it also comes pre-installed with a screen protector, which I still have on the device. It's got a cutout for the selfie camera, so it shouldn't be getting in the way of it. And who knows, maybe, I mentioned earlier that the Pixel 8 Pro maybe has a slightly brighter display. There's two caveats to that. I don't have a screen protector on the Pixel 8 Pro, and I do have a screen protector on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. So that could slightly reduce the amount of light that's getting all the way through to my eyes, and it could make the Xiaomi appear darker when actually it's probably closer to equal. Another thing to keep in mind is phones have sustained brightness and then they have peak brightness. I believe on paper that the Xiaomi is capable of a higher peak brightness, which is only activated really in 2 settings. And this goes for any phone, this isn't just a Xiaomi thing. But whenever you shine light on the phone itself, such as like the sun, if the sun's on it, it can temporarily increase the brightness of the display so that you can see outdoors a little bit better. Now that was with the Pixel outdoors. I actually don't know for certain that I've actually seen the Xiaomi increase brightness outdoors. With the Pixel, it's very obvious. So when you're outdoors, and it's not that it's dim before, like I said, to my eye, the Pixel appears to be a brighter display than the Xiaomi 15 Ultra indoors. But the Pixel, when you take it outdoors and the sun hits it, it feels like it bumps the brightness by another 500 or 600 nits. I mean, it is perceptibly brighter when the sun is on it. You see it immediately. And like I said, I haven't really noticed. I mean, it might be changing it a little bit, maybe like 100 nits, 200 nits, to maybe that I don't notice it. But it's just that I have not noticed that the Xiaomi is adjusting in the sunlight. So there you go. Maybe it does it, maybe it does not, but as best I can tell, I don't think it does that. So we're back on the rear-facing camera, and I wanted to talk about some of the small drawbacks of the Chinese version of this phone. One of the things that has bothered me with the Chinese version of this phone is when you try to activate things like Google Assistant, or you do any kind of like a home button hold or a power button hold, it almost always, well, it always launches those components of the phone in Chinese. And while there's some very minuscule customization on what you can do with those gestures and those functions, that does not include reprogramming it for the Google Assistant. I much prefer the Google Assistant. It's in English, for Christ's sake. But anyways, it's a little bit more severe than that, because I actually did get into the settings and found, I'm not gonna go and dig it up and show it on the screen, just take my word for it, but I found the settings where you could customize gestures and certain motions on the phone, and it has one for like a home button or a power button long press, and you can select the Google Assistant. And then it has another thing that, oh wow, my Google Assistant's going crazy because I said it, but it also has another thing where you can select the default assistant on the phone. And there's a Mi Assistant, obviously the like Xiaomi, you know, they name all their phones like Mi Note, the Mi 11 Ultra, all that stuff. But there is an option to declare what assistant you want to be the default assistant. The problem is that it doesn't change anything. I cannot get Google Assistant to appear under any circumstances. Regardless of what settings I change, regardless of what I declare to be the default assistant, it always uses the Chinese version, which is not the end of the world, but it is very annoying, particularly because I talk to a lot of people in other languages.
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care.
Let me tell you,
we don't care.
And it is incredibly convenient on my Google Pixel, which they just changed, so what I'm about to say is no longer valid because Google put out an update, and with that update, the feature that I'm about to describe to you is no longer available, or it's a lot more cumbersome than it was in the past. In the past, what I could do on my Google Pixel, I could long press the home button and it would scan the screen and it would give me options, and there was always a button that just says translate. Very simple, and it does exactly what you think it does. Everything on the screen that's not in English becomes English, and just like that, you can read everything on the phone. That was such a useful function. Now Google just put out an update where the Google Assistant has now been supplanted. It has now been replaced with Gemini. And I know that they're getting all into this AI stuff, and oh, it's supposed to be better, it's supposed to be smarter, it's supposed to be faster. It's worse. It is definitely worse, because one of the things they did when they implemented Gemini was they have eliminated the screen translation function, which is incredibly annoying, because that was probably by far my most used assistant function was screen translation. I probably use it 50 to 100 times per day. And now it's not there. You can long press the home button and get that, you know, circle the screen thing. The problem with that is that it does, this is gonna sound really niche, but it doesn't scroll the screen up, and so the bottommost thing that I'm translating doesn't get translated, or it does get translated, but it's getting blocked by the option bar of the assistant. In other words, like, you can't read, like, what if you got a text message, right, and you translate what's on the screen, the bottommost thing is gonna get like cut off by the assistant menu, and you're not gonna be able to read it. So even though it's kind of there sort of in spirit, but with a different function, it's still not as good, because the old assistant, what it would do is it would like translate, and it would actually like push everything up to be out of the way of the assistant. I don't know, so you could read it, duh. But now the The new one does not do that. It does not push the page up to where the assistant menu isn't blocking the text. So usually what I have to do now is I can read everything on the screen except for the most recent message. I have to copy and paste that message into a dedicated translator on another app and then come back and reply. It is cumbersome, it is slow, it is annoying, it did not need to be changed. It was perfectly fine before. The assistant is verifiably worse now. I'm sure there's other things it probably does better, but the one thing I did on it 99% of the time kind of doesn't function correctly anymore. So that's a real big annoyance. All that to say that that's one of the things I miss most on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is that I don't have access to those assistant functions, because like I was saying, there's no way for me to get the assistant to function on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. It's locked to a Chinese one. I've tried speaking English to it and stuff, give it a chance to see if like it would understand that I'm speaking English and then read it back to me. I've tried to also go into the assistant settings and change the settings to English, and I was like, you know what, maybe I'll just use it, but I'll use it in English. No, the assistant's language is locked to Chinese, and no matter how many times you change default settings or whatever, or enable this assistant, that assistant, it doesn't work. It will use the Mi Assistant, it will be in Chinese, and if that is not helpful to you, tough shit, because you're not going to get rid of it and you're not going to change it. And we are back on the selfie camera. I want to talk now about the speakers. I might try to briefly record something about the speakers. The problem with doing speaker comparisons is that I would have to record one of them on the Google and then one of them on the Xiaomi, and they're going to have different microphones, which is going to pick up the audio differently. So I would much prefer to just kind of tell you guys what's going on with the speakers in general. So I can say, in comparison to the Pixel, which have a decently serviceable, definitely not industry leading set of speakers, that the Xiaomi is just a little bit deeper and just a little bit louder than the Pixel. Although I will say at maximum volume, I have experienced a little bit, not a lot, of just like speaker vibration. I think a lot of people like to call this tinniness, where you hear like that little tin sound of the speaker vibrating inside of the housing of the phone. You do get a little bit of that in the Xiaomi. It's not very much, and it's only at like the maximum volumes, but outside of that, the Xiaomi is, I would say, I feel pretty comfortable in saying it's probably among the best in speakers, but probably not the best, but probably top 3, top 4, because I know that the Pixel was pretty solid, and the Xiaomi takes it up a little bit over the Pixel, mainly in 2 areas, and that's in like the depth of the sound. It's a little bit bassier, and then also in the volume of the sound. I think overall, I believe the iPhone probably overall still has the best speakers that you can get, but I think really where the iPhone is going to win is, I think that iPhone doesn't suffer from any tinniness that I've ever heard in any kind of comparisons, or I have friends that have iPhones and stuff, so that's probably going to be the biggest differentiator. But for things that I use it for, a lot of times I like to use my phone to wake me up as an alarm clock. It's definitely capable of that. It is among the loudest of phones that you can get, so it's really good for that. And if you're into the habit of playing videos back on your phone and you like to listen to, podcasts or whatever, it sounds very clear. It's got a nice range because of that depth. That it can kind of have a wider stage of sounds because of that. It's got all the usual nonsense on there, like Dolby, what is it, Dolby Atmos, whatever. I don't know. It's got all that stuff, right? So if you want to use it, it's on there. I think I keep it turned on. And I've played with turning it on and turning it off, and I think I can notice a little bit of a volume increase with Dolby Atmos on, so I think I just leave it on. But I don't usually find myself needing or even wanting to run this phone anywhere near the maximum sound, the maximum volume settings. But there you are. That's the speakers on this device. So I'm going to talk about the camera now, and I know that's the part that most of you are probably most interested in. And unfortunately for some people, I'm going to mostly compare it to the Pixel 8 Pro. There are not companies throwing free phones at me to be able to compare them. So, you know, I paid for this phone out of my own pocket, just like the Pixel 8 Pro. And in total, it is a significant upgrade over the Pixel 8 Pro. And it's a lot more significant in ways that I don't really hear anybody talking about, which is interesting. So one of the first things I want to say that I've heard nobody say up until this point is that the file sizes of JPEGs coming out of the Xiaomi 15 Ultra are significantly larger than file sizes of JPEGs coming out of the Pixel 8 Pro. And you've probably heard people say this before, that like not all 4K is created equal. Obviously there are things like how good is the lens, how good is the sensor, there's that stuff, but there's also things like bit rate and like megabytes per second, like how much information is the file retaining. Now, I haven't looked at that yet for the video, but let me just talk about the JPEGs for a second. I have taken Pixel photos and Xiaomi photos side by side, same subject, same lighting, same resolution, 12.5 megapixels on both. The Google Pixel has a 50 megapixel primary sensor that bends down to 12.5 megapixels. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra has a 50 megapixel sensor, which also bends down to 12.5 megapixels. So, same file format, JPEGs, same resolution, 12.5. The file sizes coming out of the Xiaomi 15 Ultra are anywhere from 3, 4, not quite, but nearing 5 times the size of the files coming out of the Pixel 8 Pro. No, I have not examined every single side-by-side, but I have seen a couple of instances where, and I've taken thousands of photos, so I'm not going to go back and look it up. I'll find a couple of examples and show them on the screen. But I have seen examples where the file size of the Pixel it comes out and it's a 1.7 megabyte file for a 12.5 megapixel photo JPEG. And then I take the same image on the Xiaomi, and the Xiaomi is exporting a JPEG, also 12.5 megapixel, also JPEG, at like 7.9 megabytes. And that is beyond 4 times. That is over 4 times the file size. There's pros and cons to that. First, the con is obviously it's going to eat more space. Pretty simple to understand. It's using more space per file. You will run out of space faster. However, there is a massive benefit to this lack of compression in the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Primarily, it is abundantly apparent that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is a far more detailed file. In fact, they don't appear to be the same resolution. Let me say that. They don't appear to be the same resolution. In fact, what I would like to say is that if the Google Pixel 8 Pro is truly exporting a 12.5 megapixel image, by comparison, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra feels more like a 20 or a 24 megapixel. I mean, it is perceptibly more resolution. There is significantly more detail when you zoom in. And I'm talking like any of them. It doesn't matter. Ultra wide, wide, telephoto, it doesn't matter. When you shoot similar photos and you pinch in and you look at the details on both, the Xiaomi is retaining far more detail in its shots, and I will show you several examples of that. I have taken lots of side-by-sides, not a ton, but enough to get the point across, enough to prove to you, yes, it is a more detailed image, yes, it is a larger file size, so on and so forth. How does the Xiaomi actually shoot? So what is the shooting experience like? I find that in most cases, the Xiaomi favors highlights a little too much, or in other words, favoring is an interesting word because you could take that either way. What I'm trying to say is that the Xiaomi has a tendency to want to overexpose. There are some quick, easy solutions to this if you like a more balanced image. Now maybe you like the brighter images, so if that's you, if you like the brighter images, maybe I say, just leave it like that. Just point and shoot and don't do anything. The simplest solution, which doesn't always work, but in I would say maybe like 30% of the time to 40% of the time, it does solve my problem, is whenever you're shooting a subject, try to tap on the brightest thing in that subject. So for example, if you're gonna shoot a car, let's say that you're in an auto show, right? The body of the car is rounded. It's got like rounded edges. There will be a part on that car where the sun is reflecting off that car into your camera, and it's gonna show up obviously as a real bright spot on the car. Simply put, instead of tapping somewhere dark on the car, tap that sunspot, tap that really bright reflection, and then the phone is going to calibrate the exposure for that really bright spot. Usually that solves the problem. Not everything has a tappable bright spot. For example, if you're shooting someone's face and let's say that they have an angle towards you, right? This eye is closer than this eye. This phone has such big sensors that you do have depth of field fall off, as in like background blur. Because of that, you can't just, like, let's say that the bright part is over here, but their face is like this, so this eye is closer. You can't tap over here because it's gonna move the focus farther away, especially if you're trying to shoot this closer eye, or if you wanna have this closer eye in focus. So I'm just letting you know that, like, you can't always solve your problems with that. Or in some other instances, you could have a bright spot that is surrounded by darker stuff, and the phone just doesn't really pick up your tap. So like you're tapping that small bright thing and it's just not picking it up. It's not like calibrating the exposure for that brighter spot. And in cases like that, you probably need to manually slide down the brightness sometimes. And that's just if you shoot your photos like me at all. But I tend to find that the phone wants to punch up brightness just a little bit, not a ton, but just a little bit brighter than I like. It's even in authentic mode. By the way, for all of the images that I'm showing, if you don't see anything, assume it's Leica authentic. I shot the vast majority of all the photos on this phone in Leica authentic. I did, for the purposes of testing, shoot some shots in Leica Vibrant. But typically, and if you don't know, let's say for some reason, I highly doubt it, but let's say for some reason my video is the first video you've ever seen about this phone. Let me tell you this. Vibrant, in short, Xiaomi's Leica Vibrant is very similar to the way that like normal smartphones shoot colors. It's a little bit brighter, it brings up shadows just a little bit. It has no vignette. That's another important thing, another important difference. It has no vignette. And if you don't know what vignette is, it's that darkness around the edge of the frame that's supposed to simulate. If you don't know where vignette comes from, it actually comes from when you shoot on like real cameras and they have like these big lenses. You got to think like that's a big dark barrel of metal with glass in the middle. And what happens is basically the phone is, or the camera is picking up just the very edges of the barrel of that lens, and that comes across as vignette. We experience that as vignette, and it basically just makes the edges of the image a little bit darker than the center of the image. Now, a lot of people like vignette because it draws the eye into the middle. So it's a more focused image, if you want to call it that. Like your eye pulls to the center of the image rather than the edges of the image. So there are some advantages of it, and it is a very photographic look that does occur naturally. It's not just a post-processing thing. I mean, it is on this phone, but what I'm saying is vignette isn't like something that some Instagram filter added one time. That's when it was invented. It was invented by an Instagram filter. No, it's a naturally occurring photographic phenomenon that comes from the barrel of a lens being picked up by the image sensor. Pretty normal stuff. You typically see it when you put maybe mismatched lenses. Like, I'll tell you, if you want the effect, let's say you have a camera and you want that effect, let me just tell you, really simple. Buy a full frame camera and put an APS-C lens on it. A lot of times APS-C mounts share the same mount size, the same mount as the full frame equivalent, but the full frame is a larger sensor. So it's gonna push the sensor to the edges of that lens a little bit more than the APS-C will. And what's gonna happen is your sensor is gonna start picking up the edges of that lens barrel. So if you want vignette, there you go. Go buy an APS-C lens and put it on your full frame camera, and you will effectively achieve the vignette look without having to edit it. Or you could just add it in post. It's really simple. Most photo editors, if you're new to photo editing, they usually have a vignette setting. It's real simple, and you can do like reverse vignette, which is where the edges of the image are brighter. Now, to my knowledge, that's not natural. There are no naturally occurring photographic phenomenon where you would have like a bright vignette. So the dark vignette is like the real vignette, or the natural occurring vignette. Anyways, so going back to the two color modes, you have like a vibrant, think smartphone colors, think no vignette, so it's pretty much the same exposure across the frame. You're gonna have a little bit picked up shadows, so the shadow brightness is lifted just a little bit, and you typically will see just overall a flatter color profile than like a authentic. Like a authentic will have slightly subdued colors, although I think it's a Leica thing. It feels like this phone has like a couple of colors sometimes that it wants to oversaturate just a little bit, even in the Leica Authentic, by the way. So there is a workaround for that. So the thing is, it has those two color profiles, but then it almost has like built-in presets. So there's like two color profiles, and then within the color profiles there are more color profiles. If I'm shooting something that is like abundantly colorful, and even in Leica Authentic it is oversaturating, like you take the photo and you're like, Jesus Christ, that balloon is red, but it's not that red. There is a way to fix it. And I'm talking about, well, obviously you can edit the image, but I'm talking about before you even take the photo, there's a way to fix it. In one of those subsidiary color profiles, there's one called Natural. So basically, you would be in, and if I'm getting the name wrong, then I'll flash it on the screen here, but I want to say it's called Leica Natural. What you do is you'll have the color profile in whatever you're choosing is Leica Vibrant or Leica Authentic, and if you're just not satisfied with how over the top the saturation is, all you have to do is change the color profile from like none or the default to natural, and it basically knocks down the saturation even more. And I'm sure that there's other things that it does, but that to me is what I've primarily noticed. And I want to say there's been a couple instances where I'm shooting an object that's red, and it's like, man, it's picking up like big red color that's not really indicative of the phone or of the way the scene actually looks. And that is one way that you can do it. I'm just telling you in case you don't like to edit photos, if you're the kind of person to where you want to take the photo and just be done. You don't want to do any editing afterwards. You want to snap it and then never look at it again unless you post it. That is one of the ways that you can do it, is just keep in mind that you have that color profile available to you. and I'll flash on the screen where that is. Let's talk about the white balance and color accuracy. In general, I find this to be one of the most color accurate cameras on a phone that you can get compared to a lot of other ones. Now, sometimes it's a little bit moodier than reality. That's pretty easy to fix. If it's too shadows, you can just go into post and brighten the shadows if you want a more neutral, more natural color profile. But one of the other things I've noticed, and I'm not quite sure if it's because of the way the screen was calibrated out of the box, because if you remember from the beginning of this long review at this point, I mentioned that the phone had a tendency to like favor blue shades on the screen, and it took me a while before I like recalibrated it. So I think some of the images that I took very early on this phone, I took them while the phone had a more blue color profile on the actual display. It was more skewed towards cool colors, and then I fixed it and then went from there. Now, with that being said, trusting my instinct, I will say that this phone, especially with unnatural light, so I'm talking about indoor, like overhead ceiling lights, this phone tends to favor a slightly green tint. Very, very, very soft, very, very subtle. A lot of phones, if you don't know, you measure their color accuracy like 4 dimensions. It's the warm versus cool. In other words, like yellowish orange to like blue range. Like how accurate is it from like the yellow orange to blue? How is it in that? But then you also have the tint, which is like magenta. In other words, in short, it's like how kind of like almost like a pinkish reddish color it's picking up versus a green tint. And there are lots of examples of this. This is very easy to find examples of phones having tint issues or having color balance issues. iPhones are famous for shooting warm. They love to shoot warm. They turn everything into a yellow hellscape. Now, I think they've gotten a little bit better in like the last like 1 year, but not by much. And I think a lot of that is due to people using the built-in presets for the iPhone and manually making the phone more color accurate. But I'm just talking like if you pick up an iPhone, you snap a photo, the photo that it produces is usually too far into the warm direction. Now with the Xiaomi, it's very color accurate overall when it nails it. When it nails it, it nails it. But sometimes the shadows can be too deep. I'm talking like, I like shadows. I don't like it when phones overbrighten shadows, but I'm saying sometimes the shadows look even darker than real life. So sometimes it misses with the shadows. Sometimes the phone wants to skew the tint a little bit in the green direction. My experience, maybe I'm wrong. And I mostly see that in indoor lighting. I don't really see that outdoor. Outdoor, this is an extremely color accurate phone. Outdoors, when it has natural light, the sun's in the sky, you're gonna generally get pretty color accurate images out of it. Some of the other things that might help you, so if you're not satisfied with the Leica Vibrant or Leica Authentic dichotomy, right? Because those are like the 2 main color profiles. In fact, it's like a separate setting from the other color profiles. So it's like, again, I said this already, but it's like color profiles within color profiles. It's really weird. But anyways, if you're not satisfied with those, fret not, because there's a really cool function. I'm gonna show some footage of this. There's a really cool function in the Pro mode, which is the manual mode. So if you're a little skittish of Pro modes, I would say don't for this one, and I'll tell you why. In the Pro mode, you can establish like presets for the Pro mode. This is huge, and why this is a big deal is because you could get this phone in Pro mode, in manual mode, to where you're not having to constantly change everything, start from scratch, adjust every setting, right? So what I've done, and I'm gonna add more, I don't know how many it lets you build, but I'm gonna build more. You can basically go outside. Let me tell you how you would make this work. On a bright, normal sunny day, like right now, there's not a cloud in the sky, it's blue. You see that? right? It is perfectly blue, perfectly sunny. On a day like today, you go outside, you go into the pro mode, and you calibrate the settings to perfection. You get them exactly where they need to be, you get the color balance exactly where it needs to be, and you can go to the right, so you swipe all the way to the right, and you can make it save the way that your settings are as a preset. And what I would do is save these settings per situation. So like this would be like bright, sunny, midday is what I would call it. Bright, sunny, midday. Save that. And now, when you're not satisfied with, if you're not satisfied with the Leica Authentic, Leica Vibrant, and you're like, man, I think I can do better in manual, and it's a bright sunny day, you don't have to start from your settings being all kind of out of whack and all over the place, and your shutter speed is wrong, and your exposure value is wrong, and your ISO is wrong, and your white balance is wrong, and everything's wrong, and you have to go through and adjust every single thing before you take a photo. No. You go in, you go to that bright sunny day color profile that you saved. It's like setting presets that you saved, and you click it, and your phone will instantly adopt all of the settings that you saved. It will go to the white balance that you chose, it will go to the shutter speed that you chose, and it will go to the ISO that you chose. And typically I just always keep the focus on auto, because there's no reason to have manually established autofocus, like, or focus. Why would you do that? But you could do that, and I did that for a handful of scenarios. So like a bright cloudy day, right? If there's like thin clouds, but it is cloudy all the way through, right? It's more of a really bright gray day. Versus like if you have like deep, like thunderstorms rolling in, and you have like thick, heavy, dark gray clouds, you're gonna have a completely different color profile. So I actually have a dark cloudy day preset, I have a bright cloudy day preset, I have a bright midday preset. And when you build these out, and you could do them for a handful of things, and I'll tell you the two other ones where you probably want to do it: a general night shooting option, build out like a night one, definitely some kind of a cloud, some kind of a midday, maybe a sunset, right? Because in sunset you're going to have like much more orange tones naturally, and that might be something that you have to compensate for. But whatever your thing is, right? And if you have I would tell you generally don't do that for indoors, and I'll tell you why. Almost every lighting indoors, so if you go from like building to building to building, you're going to have like this place's lights are more neutral, this place's lights are more yellow, this place's lights are more blue, this place has like, you know, old delamination on their lights, and it's creating an ugly tone, right? What I'm trying to say is that your white balance from building to building to building to building is going to be all over the place. If you have a building for some reason, like say at the office, right? Let's say you're like a social media manager or something, and you shoot photos and stuff for your office. I don't know, I'm making something up. You would consistently be shooting inside of that office all the time. In that case, I would make a preset for that office's settings. And then finally, I would make one that's a little bit more fast. Like let's say you're trying to shoot cars and stuff, make one that's like high ISO, very fast shutter speed, like 1/4000th, 1/2000th of 1 second, something like that, to where you could shoot moving objects really fast. And basically, if you do all of that, you have every scenario covered with your own manual modes. And I would say that the color profile is really, really natural. I mean, obviously because you're covering everything. The reason why I say that is because one of the things about white balance on this phone that's pretty important, when you have a light source in the image, what I've noticed, and this is why like the indoor white balance tends to be a little bit more off, what I noticed is that the phone wants to calibrate for the light source, not for the light itself, but for the light source. So there's instances where in an image you have like an artificial light source. Like let's say that there's a lamp in the room, or let's say that there's a window open and you have sunny light like coming into the room. The phone, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, typically what I've experienced is that it's gonna try to calibrate for the light source, and it's gonna throw off everything else in the image. It's not my biggest complaint. I will say the Pixel gets it right a little bit more than the Xiaomi does when you have like a light source intruding into a scene. That's not to say that this is a bad camera. I'm just trying to keep it real. I'll show you examples. I have lots of examples of that. I'm just trying to keep you informed on like what you can expect when you're shooting this thing in different settings. By the way, I'm still on the selfie camera. So how's the dynamic range? Selfie image against the sun. So I'm going to show you all that, and then there's a few other things I might show you with the photos. This is going to be like one of the longest reviews of the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. You guys can hate it later. I will put timestamps on everything though, so just use the timestamps. If you don't want to hear all this shit, just skip to the parts you want to hear. Okay, one other thing about the camera that I'm hoping that they'll put out in a software update, but for some reason I kind of doubt it. I don't like that you basically can't adjust anything without going into the pro mode. And another thing I don't like is you can't basically shoot like an auto raw. I mean, you kind of can, because so here's the thing. So by default, when you open the pro mode is set to like manual everything. So you open the pro mode and you tap and you shoot, and it's basically going to function like the JPEG mode or the auto mode, but with well, I think even by default it's set to output JPEGs, but you can set raw, and just know, at least in mine, and maybe it's the setting, I didn't look into it, but for mine, when I have that setting on, raw or ultra raw, it does output a JPEG with it. It's not just a raw. I kind of wish that they would just have like so for example, the Pixel, it's just a convenience thing that I really like. A lot of the time the auto mode gets close enough, right? And typically if you're going to shoot raw, you're going to edit anyways. Like, I don't need to get everything adjusted before I can take the shot, right? A lot of times I just want the raw to have a bit more flexibility. I kind of wish they had an option to where when you're in the regular auto mode, like like you open the camera, it's in auto mode right there. I wish they would have a raw plus JPEG output without going into the pro mode at all. So that's another thing, is you have to go into the pro mode at all to get any kind of a raw output. That's not a huge deal, but I'm just pointing that out because it's quite convenient on the Pixel, because you can just get both. You could just set it to raw plus JPEG and then shoot auto, and you still get a raw to go along with it. Now granted, the raw file is not as good of a quality as the files coming out of the Xiaomi. You know, we talked about this earlier with the whole JPEG situation, where the JPEG files coming out of the Xiaomi, they're significantly larger files, and I've shown you already that they are significantly more detailed. So kind of like how not all 4K is created equal, not all JPEGs are created equal, not all RAWs are created equal. That's something y'all need to know, is just because it says 12 megapixels doesn't mean you're going to get the same level of quality as another. Just because it says 4K, it doesn't mean that you're going to get the same level of detail as someone else's 4K. So just keep that in mind. One final thing that I'm not a super big fan of, as soon as I remember it, I did finally remember, the high resolution modes. I really don't like how they have implemented the high resolution modes. Like you may know, like many other phones right now, including iPhones, including Samsungs, including Vivos, a lot of them are using higher resolution sensors. And when you want to, on pretty much every phone, you can say, hey, I want the full resolution of the sensor, right? 50 megapixels, you divide that by 4, you get 12.5, right? So most phones are outputting something around a 12 to a 12.5 megapixel image, but then you can tell it, hey, don't bend the image, give me the full resolution. This is pretty normal. With the Xiaomi, again, it's a small thing, it's not a huge deal, but it does, it's a little bit less convenient. On the Pixel, on like just the standard auto mode, like open the phone, point, shoot, you can have it just like earlier where I said it'll output RAWs and JPEGs in the regular mode. You can also make the Pixel output the full 50 megapixels, again, in the regular mode. You don't have to be in the pro mode to do it. But in the Xiaomi, you have to be in the pro mode. Like, there is no option, zero. There is no option to get a 50 megapixel output from the Xiaomi in the regular mode. There's a couple of other things about that I don't like. For one, And I'm going to show you just a couple of examples, because I'll tell you, I tested it and I ultimately decided I didn't want to use it. And the reason for that is it doesn't really seem to give you very much. It lets you crop in further, like it'll let you pinch further, but as far as like the actual resolution, it is minuscule. If you're gaining anything, it's small. It's extremely small. I'm talking like 5%, 10%, maybe in increased resolution, in terms of like perceivable increased resolution. What it seems to be doing, and I'll show you an example of this. It seems to be processing more, and that's like a bad thing. That's the worst case scenario. You know, you would hope that that resolution would have a very like natural appearance, and that it wouldn't be very like processed. That's kind of one of the reasons why I like the Xiaomi so much, is that it has a less processed look, in my opinion. It seems like there's a lot of like boosted artificial sharpness in the 50 megapixel mode, and then with the telephoto you can actually take a 200 megapixel shot. But the background blur, and I'll show you this, the background blur looks a lot crunchier. It looks a lot more digital. It has this like staticky kind of appearance to it that you don't get when you just shoot on the standard 12 megapixel resolution. It looks a lot busier. The shot looks a lot busier. And so for that reason, the reason that I don't have a ton of samples of that is because I tested it. I really did not like the result. For one, this camera already shoots giant files. If you shoot in the 50 megapixel, 200 megapixel, you're shooting gigantic files for what doesn't appear to be much benefit. Now with the Pixel, there is a perceivable benefit. It's not massive, but the thing is, the funny part is, the Xiaomi's resolution already looks so good. Like I've showed you where the Xiaomi's 12.5 megapixel image appears to be a much higher resolution than the Pixel's 12.5. The funny thing is, when you shoot the Pixel on 50, now this is gonna sound funny, when you shoot the Pixel on 50 megapixels, it looks very similar to how the Xiaomi looks on 12.5 megapixels. So it kind of balances out. Very interesting result. But yeah, it's I just don't really see much need to do it. And then there's one more giant drawback that I haven't mentioned yet to the higher resolution modes. And this one, again, I wish they'll put out a software update and just eliminate this, because I think it's stupid. It forces you, like, it's like there's no choice. You will shoot, like you have no option. You will shoot on Leica Vibrant when you shoot in higher resolution modes. Why? No idea. No idea. But you have no option to shoot the Leica Authentic color profile in the 50 or the 200 megapixel modes. Why? I don't know. Because when you're in the master mode or the pro mode with all the manual controls, if you're in the low resolution, the 12.5, which still looks great, you can still select a color profile. You can still select, you know, Leica Authentic or Leica Vibrant as you want. But anytime you go into the higher resolutions, you no longer have the option. So that's it. And that's my final word on it. I think I've covered just about everything. I'm gonna shoot one more photo comparison right here, right now. And what that's gonna be is, I'm gonna kind of display something for you. I'm gonna shoot 50 megapixels on this, and I'm gonna shoot 12 megapixels on the Xiaomi, and I'm going to show you that they're really close. Like, even though the Pixel's shooting 4 times the resolution, Pixel's 50 megapixel resolution looks like Xiaomi's 12.5 megapixel resolution. So I'm going to show that for you real quick. The big flaw, and I'll try to get footage of this, but I don't know how successful I'll be because it doesn't really show up on camera that well, is I had a pocket knife. Pretty normal affair. If you ever watch Jerry Rig Everything's videos, what you'll know is, you know, plastics and wood materials are the softest, and then you have metals, and then you have stones like sapphire, quartz, diamond, and so on. Anyways, typically metals don't really bother glass that much. Usually glass is a bit harder than metal. But what was really interesting is the camera glass on this Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Sorry, I just finished a run, so I'm kind of a little bit winded, but the camera glass over the camera housing on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra has a very soft glass, and I tested this first by accident, but then I tested it again on purpose. But my pocket knife had rubbed up against it, and it left a pretty substantial scratch on the glass. that I can't get out. So it's definitely like a permanent scratch. And then I went back and I was trying to figure out what scratched it, because I actually had a lot of things sitting on the table. It wasn't in my pocket when it happened. But so there was a couple things that I tested, and it was the pocket knife that had done it. And I scratched basically a blank part of the glass. It doesn't really matter. But then, you know, as a comparison, I took my Pixel 8 Pro and I took the same knife and I took it to the camera glass over it. And it did leave a scratch, but it was significantly smaller, as in so much so that I didn't actually realize that it had scratched the glass until the following day when I was in better light. Whereas the Xiaomi, the scratch was immediately perceptible. Like, you could see it as soon as it happened. It was like, wow, there it is right there. The reason why this is like a huge flaw, right, is, I know that might seem small, but let's be completely real. If someone's buying the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, it is because they want this camera. And for it to have such a soft camera glass that is so easily destroyed, and like I said, I got lucky because the scratch, it's not actually affecting anything over the lenses. Like, it managed to like miss all the sensors. It's like in a blank spot. But you know, if you're gonna hold on to this camera, this phone for 2 years, 3 years, whatever, I've had this phone for a month and a half. You know, if you have regular wear and tear, you know, you take it with you, you travel with it, you go around stuff, like, you're eventually gonna scratch this camera. It's inevitable, right? You're going to scratch this camera housing. And for it to be this soft on such an important component of this phone it's pretty concerning, because like right now it's fine, right? But this camera housing, it will get scratched more. It will get scratched more. You know, fast forward 2 years, this thing is going to get scratched again. And it's only a matter of time. I got really lucky, but it's only a matter of time before the scratches start to actually be over the lenses themselves and not just over the glass where there are no cameras. So I got lucky this time, but in the long run, this could be a big issue. It really could be a big issue, because clearly the Pixel 8's glass is a lot more substantial, or at least it scratched much less than the Xiaomi did. And again, I'll try to get footage of it. I don't know how successful I'll be, but if it's, I mean, you'll know if it's successful because I'll roll the B-roll over this clip. But to me, that's kind of a big deal. It's kind of a big deal. And that'll wrap it up. Sorry that this video is so long. I hope you guys use the timestamps and skip to the parts that you care about. But thanks for tuning in. I hope this helped someone if you're considering getting this phone. Overall, it's tremendous. Great speakers, great screen, tremendous battery, great camera with some quirks and flaws, but overall a fantastic camera. A little slow sometimes. It likes to shoot longer shutter speeds at night, but in general, it's fantastic. But that's going to be it. If you have any questions, put them down below. I'll be happy to respond to you guys. I don't have a lot of subscribers or anything, so I can pretty much respond to any comment because I don't really get that much. Thank you guys. I'd appreciate a subscribe if you got any value out of this video, and I'll see you guys on the next one when we're going to deep dive the video functions, and we're going to deep dive in a separate video the advanced camera functions. Talk to you guys later. Peace. So this was a bit of an interesting result for the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Obviously there's a little bit of a gap between itself and where the log begins. The ultra wide is actually, you know, closer to somewhere around here, but I don't think too many people are concerned about the minimum focusing distance. I think one of the things that's really interesting to note is that this is the 1x lens, the 1-inch sensor, and it actually focuses out a little bit further than this is the 3x, you know, the telemacro lens. So this is the short zoom, again 1x, short zoom 3x, and then you have the 4.3x right here. And pardon the ghetto measuring stick, but I tried to get this even with where the lens begins. But you can basically get an idea of the minimum focusing distance of the 4.3x lens, the 1x lens, and the 3x lens, respectively. This might be a little bit odd to you, but the Pixel 8 Pro actually has focus peaking. And you can actually see that when I line these two up with the can, that the 1x lens actually has a minimum focusing distance very similar to the Xiaomi 15 Ultra's telephoto macro. This is where the Xiaomi 15 Ultra's 1x lens was. This is the 3x lens, so 1x. We're currently on the Pixel's 1x, and it's right there. And you can see the focus peaking right there. And I'll take a photo, but you can see the peaks of pink on the screen. So right there. And by comparison, this is the Pixel 8 Pro's 5x telephoto lens, and you can see it's a good bit further than the Xiaomi 15 Ultra's 4.3. A little bit longer than a Coke can of difference. So it's probably, you know, between 7 to 8 inches of difference. And you can see the focus peaking right there. Of course, I'll take a photo, or maybe I've accidentally turned it off, but I did just have it up before I took that photo. So you can see the difference between them. I hope that's apparent.